started last week, we started a sign up for this new series, Virtue and Vice. And I put forward a bunch of pairings of 7 deadly sins paired with fruit of the Spirit. And I broke it down week by week. And I asked people to sign up. You immediately volunteered to talk about envy.
Yes.
And I am fascinated as to why. Why was that the first thing that, you were drawn to as far as addressing?
So there's this thing called Strengths Finder. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. It's basically a personality quiz, but it pulls out like, what are your strengths? So it's really geared to just figuring out for work, like your work life, like what can you really work towards or really focus on. And so my top skill that came out was achiever. And if you're an employer, it's like, wow, yeah, that's what I want, that person, right? They're an achiever. They're just going to go above and beyond all the time. For me, I'm like, because I can't turn it off. So it's really something that I don't love about myself, even though it's my top skill, which is kind of weird. And so when you think of the saying, the grass is always greener on the other side, I've hit that other side over and over and over, but I constantly keep grasping and grasping and grasping. So take that, put a pin in it, that about me, and turn the lens to social media. And my husband and I actually got off Facebook probably 7 years ago now. So that's already off the table. But so my focus is usually on LinkedIn and Instagram. And really, I feel like in the last month, I've been really struggling with envy, and that every time I look at LinkedIn, you're just seeing people posting about promotions or just having the time to post really cool content, or they're starting their own business. And I just constantly feeling envious of these people and the things that they're doing, and feeling like I need to achieve what they're doing. Same thing with Instagram. I probably around the time we dropped Facebook, I was like, I'm going to unfollow everybody on Instagram, and I'm only going to follow people that post positivity, or positivity or mental health stuff or yoga stuff. But I still found now, I still only follow those people, but I find myself envying, where do they have all this time to just do yoga? How did they build a career out of just doing yoga? Or why are they so positive? Just envious, or travel ones, envious that they have all this time to travel and see all these beautiful places that I've always wanted to do. So I'm now 2 weeks of just cutting off LinkedIn and Instagram, and I feel wonderful. It's been great. So I just wanted to say that I've realized that I've come up with the solution for envy. It's to become a hermit. A hermit, just shut off everything, and then you have nothing to envy. So that's kind of where I am with envy right now.
I am interested. I'm intrigued. So I'll show my cards as well.
Okay.
So I love Instagram. So I got off Twitter a couple years ago because it was just so mean-spirited, right? But I love Instagram because for me, it's sort of like a big pajama party, right? Just people having fun and posting these things. But then this study came out over a year ago about the effect that both Facebook, but specifically Instagram, was having on our young people, and specifically our young women. And it really caught my attention about how what it does to us psychologically to always be comparing ourselves to other people. And so that gave me a little bit of caution, but I honestly love Instagram, and I find that it's such a nice little break in my day, of dealing with all the stuff that I have to deal with. And then, I look at Instagram, and it picks me up a little bit. It gives me a little endorphin burst or something, I don't know, but I find myself it improves my mood a little bit. But you're saying that's not how everyone interacts with.
Yeah. And I think everybody's different. And I think it's figuring out who you are. And if it's not good, healthy for you, then it is, well, for me, I'm sure I'll go back to it at some point in my life. But right now I really needed to take a break, and it seems like it was the right thing to do, because I wasn't finding any joy out of it, only anxiety.
I like that you had the conviction to say, this isn't bearing the fruit in me that I want to. And so I'm not going to invest any more time and energy in this since it's not doing in me what I want. Are you like that with everything? Are you a person of conviction? Is that something you've fostered, or is it part of your just your disposition?
I don't know. That's a good question. It wasn't easy. I feel like it was a few months of realizing it, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna I'll only look at it in the morning, and I'll only look at it at this time, and that just did not work, because I feel like it's once you open it once, like I felt like in the middle of the day I was just like, if I was bored, mind break, I'd open LinkedIn and start scrolling, but then I'd realize like it was distracting me so much from my work and making me feel like I'm not, like I need to do more or need to do something different, that I wasn't then performing at work. I don't know. It was addictive. Like it was either I had to stop or the whole setting boundaries for myself wasn't working. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah. So I think for different people with different personalities, their envy may not be something that registers on my radar. But when I heard you talk about stepping off of social media, all week, what I've been thinking about is, for me, it's like it's a slight step over, but it's a very similar thing. One time, a mentor of mine gave me a book about ambition and said it was his favorite book. And I hated the book. But for the 20 years since that happened, I've always thought to myself, I don't struggle with having too much ambition. I actually struggle with not having enough ambition. I'm not ambitious enough. And when I knew you were coming to the table this week, the thing that I kept thinking to myself is, obviously we don't want envy, because that's like right unhealthy. But is it possible to not have enough envy? Because my fear is that just the absence of envy doesn't lead to contentment, right? You can have the absence of one thing, but not the presence of another. And so I've been thinking to myself, like, I love that you had the conviction to say, like, I'm done with this. But then I want to ask, like, for myself personally, like, what do you replace that with? Or is the vacuum an invitation to be filled by contentment with what you have? Is that a natural process, or do you have to like invest and cultivate in something else, right, to replace not having that?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about the same thing, which is why I kind of made this joke about being a hermit. It's like there has to be that like the spectrum of like balancing, like you can't be a hermit and just like not expose yourself to anything, because then you wouldn't have envy, but a little bit of it does give you some drive, I guess, to achieve something new. But for me, I know personally about myself, knowing that I'm like an overachiever, like it's just like I'm on overdrive all the time, that it wasn't good for me to have those other, like it has shown me to, or at least in the 2 weeks that I haven't been on LinkedIn and Instagram, is like I've been much more content with my success, like where I'm proud of like what I'm doing and like engaged. So I think maybe I was just tipping the scale, and I just needed to drop those two things to be more content with what I'm succeeding in.
I have to tell you, I love that it's working.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's not, there's certainly, of course, things that I still been really helpful.
I appreciate your honesty so much, and your willingness to be the first person to come and sit at the table. As we continue to go through this series, if you have any updates for us, just let us know, because I'm going to be interested in this journey, and I will let you know that if this continues to work for you, I will seriously consider following your example.
Okay.
All right. So keep us updated on how it's going. Okay. Can we thank her for coming to the table? The pairing that I came up with for this week was envy and patience. So as I looked at the 7 deadly sins, and I looked at the fruit of the Spirit, and I saw how each of them might speak to each other, I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about patience, all right? One of the things we said last week in the introduction to the series is that you and I are well practiced at either or thinking, black and white, us and them, right and wrong. We're well practiced at it. And there are times where that does not serve us well. And I think that patience, when it comes to the fruit of the Spirit, patience is one of those times. Because in either or thinking, you're either patient or you're impatient. Those are the options, okay? I'm not sure that that's the healthiest way forward, especially as people of faith. So a couple weeks ago, when we were going through the Psalms in August, we talked about Psalm 40. If you weren't here that week, you can go back on YouTube or the podcast and listen to talking about Psalm 40. Psalm 40 is famous because it starts with, I waited patiently for the Lord. That's how it starts. And people love Psalm 40. I waited patiently. Patience doesn't come to everyone naturally. How many of you struggle with patience? About half the room. Okay, I expected that. Patience is something that really does have to be sort of cultivated and nourished, because it isn't in our human nature for many of us to be patient. We actually want things now. We want them quickly. We wish they were already here. Patience is one of those things you have a bigger framework for. And so I want to say to you that in this series, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to take whatever our topic is, and it's usually going to be the fruit of the Spirit. And instead of going either or, so patient and impatient, I actually want to use an older model that says this is a virtue that leads us forward. It's sort of the best way, but that there are extremes on both sides of it to be avoided. So instead of saying patient and impatient, I actually want to put patience in the middle, and I want to say, okay, if we move impatient to the negative side, but where I think wisdom is found in this is, what do we call having too much patience? So there's not enough patience, and I think an equal danger is having too much patience. Is there something that we could call that? Can we give that a label or a title? Inaction, I like that. Complacence, I like this.
Laziness.
Laziness, okay. Yeah. Complacency. As people of faith, I want to say to you that I think that there is a way to live in faith that brings about a good and healthy version of patience in our life. But I also think that there is a caution about not having enough patience, and a caution about too much patience. So I want to put this idea in front of you. Because I come from a sports background, and a lot of preachers use a lot of sports analogies, I have committed over the past 15 years to not use sports analogies in my preaching. And it has brought about very good things in my life. And in replacement for sports ball, I have found my most effective analogies come from quilting and gardening. All right. These are the two replacements to sports ball that I have found the best way to talk about faith is quilting and gardening. And today, when we talk about patience, I actually think that these two subjects are the perfect snapshot for us because they are two different kinds of patient. When you use quilting as an analogy, there is a kind of patience that is needed for quilting. Does anyone want to say amen? Right, it's not, you have to have a little, that was a big amen, by the way. You have to have a bit of patience, right, to quilt because it's a long-term project. It's not as simple as buying a kit, spending a couple days on a weekend, slapping it together, and yay, I have a quilt. You have to have a much longer timeline, and you have to have some abstract thinking because first you chop up this perfectly good fabric into much smaller pieces. Then you rearrange it, then you put it back together, then you put some other layers to it, then you quilt. Quilting's like the last step, right? Quilting is a perfect analogy for me of what faith looks like in a community, right? It's almost the same thing for me as the thing that we do for communion, this liturgy of life, that you take a good thing, you give thanks, you break it into smaller parts, and you share it, right? It's the same sort of motive. But there's a kind of patience involved in quilting that is an active patience. It's patience while you're busy. You're working. You're often working hard. In fact, if you don't work, it won't happen. So I'm going to put that in one kind of patience. There's a kind of patience that requires your activity. Gardening, on the other hand, is a little different because gardening, while it does require some activity from you, gardening actually is a different kind of patience because you are trusting that the good work you did in putting the seed in the ground is actually going to bear fruit whether you do anything else or not in most cases. And here's the difference. No matter how much activity you do, you probably can't speed up or bring about more fruit than is going to happen in the process of what is natural. So while you are somewhat active, all of your activity is not going to bear that much more fruit, right? With the investment, there's like a return on investment for energy. And there's a natural process that occurs that actually requires that you be patient because, and this is why Jesus used farming analogies all the time, because the earth is going to bring forth that fruit, right? The sun and the rain of the seasons. You can't force harvest the season of autumn. You can't force the fruit to come. I know that some people try to limited success, but for our analogy, I think in our life, there are these two kinds of patience that are asked of us. There is a category of things in our life that require our activity. Now, we need to be patient with them, but we still have to be active. We have to invest, we have to work, sometimes work really hard, but be patient in the midst of our effort. And then there's another category where patience is called for because ultimately it's not our activity that brings about the results. In the life of faith, I find it really helpful to distinguish between things that are sort of dependent on me, like quilting. If I say I'm going to quilt this weekend and I don't, no work gets done on the quilt. Versus if I say I'm going to work in my garden this weekend and I don't, the garden still grows. What's that? And the weeds, sure, and the weeds, but it still grows. And in my life, I have found it really helpful to say about whatever the activity is. Let's say friendship. If I'm saying I'm lonely or I wish I had better friendships, right? And I say, well, I'm just going to be patient. Well, chances are that if I don't invest in my friendships, if I don't call people and follow up with them, if I don't make appointments to go and sit across table, if I don't think about what kind of a friend does this person need, if I don't do it like quilting, it doesn't get done. I mean, once in a while, you'll just fall into a friendship, right? That requires almost no work, but those are pretty rare. Most of the time, relationships require investment. But then there are other things in my life, for me in the life of faith, where I have to trust, I have to be patient that good things are coming. You know, when I got appointed to this church more than 4 years ago, we were a turnaround project. We were what the denomination calls a revitalization project. And so we've invested in good things. We've restructured, we've reorganized, we've invested the time and energy and put in lots and lots of hours. But you know, ultimately, we can't bring about success of God's vision for this congregation. We have to be patient that if we've done good things and we continue to invest in good things in the world, that God's Spirit is going to bring more and more people to participate with us and revitalize this congregation. In fact, if we try and bring it about in our power, we're going to make something that ultimately is less than God's vision for this place. Part of that kind of patience is a gardening patience. Sure, we need to pull the weeds and we need to do, right, the things that need done. But ultimately, this is God's people. And so God's Spirit is going to call to her children. And if they're a good fit here and we're a good fit for what's going on in their life, then that's going to happen. And so we have to have a patience. You don't want to be the kind of person that tries to force God's hand for growth and success, because it makes you into somebody that is less available to God's good things, right? But there's another category of things, like, for instance, painting this building this summer, where if we don't scrape and prime and pick up a brush, it doesn't happen. So when it comes to capital improvements, right, I would put that in the quilting category, that there's just certain amount of effort that's required. If we want to bring about an end product, you have to do it. But on the other hand, as far as the future of this congregation, that's us partnering with God in the garden to do the part that's ours to do, but ultimately to allow God to be God and to bring about the fruit that God's Spirit is dreaming of, and to just be the people who are available to partner with the life of the garden to help bring about its greatest possibility. So I'm going to give you a second to think about, do you have anything in your life, a category of friendship, work, whatever it is, health, whatever, that you are frustrated by? And I just want to ask you a question. Is it a quilting thing or is it a gardening thing? Is it something you need to be patient at while you work? Or is it something that you do your thing, but ultimately you can't force to bring about? I'll just give you a second to think about it.